Dear friends, I want to share with you an unexpected performance by the legendary actor and former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger. This well-known politician recently spoke at a forum where he sharply criticized the actions of German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and his government. Schwarzenegger expressed the opinion that Germany's rejection of Russian gas was a tragedy for its industry, and the so-called green policy turned out to be just a screen that left the German people in a fool. His words could not but cause a wide resonance. Inspired by this, I would like to first share my thoughts on what is happening in Europe, and then move on to Iron Arnold's performance. Friends, just listen to this. The European Union, led by its unconditional faith in its climate messianism, proves every day that the road to energy collapse is paved with good intentions. The main mouthpieces of the Green Revolution confidently broadcast: "We have abandoned Russian gas. We are no longer dependent on an aggressive neighbor." These beautiful slogans, which were supposed to be the anthem of a new era of energy independence, look very different in reality. Russia continues to supply gas and oil to Europe through third countries, but at a double markup. Meanwhile, Europe is learning to live with the energy crisis that it has created with its own hands. The paradox is that Russian energy resources continue to enter the European market, only labeled "Made in India" or "Made in Turkey." Turkey has become a transit hub, earning billions by re-exporting Russian gas, while India buys oil at a discount and resells it to Europe at market prices. All this time, European officials have been cheerfully reporting on overcoming dependence on Russia. Against the background of such hypocrisy, ordinary citizens receive bills for electricity and gas, which have increased significantly. Germany, once proud of its industrial might, is experiencing a real decline. Windmills and solar panels, on which hopes have been pinned, have never been able and will never be able to provide stable energy supply to an economy of this scale. As a result, German industrial production has declined by 20% over the past 3 years. Carbon taxes, the abandonment of nuclear energy and green initiatives have become a real verdict for businesses. These are not just numbers, these are millions of people out of work. An example is the chemical giant BASF, which is reducing production and shifting facilities to China and the United States. The closure of nuclear power plants in Germany is a separate tragicomic episode. Someone in Brussels decided that nuclear energy, one of the most environmentally friendly, had suddenly become dirty. "We must abandon nuclear energy in order to protect the planet," the official said. However, without a nuclear power plant, Germany is forced to launch coal-fired power plants, which it itself tried to get rid of. The possibility of reopening already closed stations is now being seriously discussed. It's not even an anecdote, it's a diagnosis. France, on the other hand, relies on nuclear energy to survive the crisis. As a result, German environmentalists criticize French nuclear power plants, but they buy electricity produced there from France. Hungary, in turn, continues to receive Russian gas under long-term contracts. Prime Minister Viktor Orbán openly points out the hypocrisy of his colleagues from Brussels, noting that Europe is ready to turn a blind eye to sanctions when it comes to its own interests. Orbán remains perhaps the only European leader who has criticized the anti-Russian sanctions from the very beginning, calling them a shot in the foot. He stresses, "By rejecting cheap and stable gas, we are undermining our economy." Thus, Europe's energy policy looks increasingly contradictory. The words about independence remain slogans, while reality dictates its own terms. Instead of energy independence, we see an increase in dependence on intermediaries, a crisis in industry, and huge costs for ordinary citizens. But what about the notorious electric cars? Brussels continues to insist that the future belongs to them, and internal combustion engines, ICE, should remain in the past. According to the decision of the European Union, starting from 2035, the production of cars with internal combustion engines will be prohibited. But officials prefer not to talk about the negative aspects of such a transition. The production of batteries for electric cars causes enormous damage to the environment. Mining of lithium, cobalt, and nickel destroys entire ecosystems, leaving behind a dead land. And the most ironic thing is that these electric vehicles are charged with electricity, which is produced by the same coal and gas power plants. Thus, coal, which Europe promised to leave in the past, is returning, only now with a green label. Special attention should be paid to the new law on heating in Germany, which obliges citizens to switch to environmentally friendly heat pumps. The cost of such a transition reaches tens of thousands of euros per family, which caused widespread discontent among the population. Germans, accustomed to stability, were faced with a choice: to freeze in winter or get into huge debts. At the same time, thousands of businesses across Europe are going bankrupt and millions of jobs are disappearing. The economic downturn in Germany is structural, says Markus Kretschmer, an economics professor from Berlin. This means that it will be extremely difficult to return to the previous level of production, even if all the green initiatives are cancelled tomorrow. Factories are empty, manufacturers are moving their facilities to China and India, and European markets remain with mounting debts. And what is Ursula von der Leyen doing in this crisis? Instead of correcting the course, she continues to promote her green reforms as if nothing had happened. In her last speech, she stated, "We cannot afford to deviate from our climate goals." However, the Europe of the future, where millions are unemployed and factories are closed, obviously does not fit into these goals. Meanwhile, Russia is quietly selling its gas and oil, bypassing sanctions, and Europe, to the applause of its officials, is drowning its own economy. None of the elite, apparently, is going to change course. It all sounds like the epitome of an aphorism. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. This classic dictum perfectly describes the energy and climate policy of the European Union. As promised, friends, Arnie's performance, we are listening. It was against this background that Arnold Schwarzenegger spoke extremely harshly. In his speech, he not only toured the European elites, but also indirectly sided with Russia. He noted, "We are talking about solar projects proposed 6 to 14 years ago, and more than half of them have not yet led to real results. Coal and oil continue to dominate, which is once again a victory for fossil fuel companies." Schwarzenegger added that despite President Biden's historic trillion-dollar investments in clean energy, turning these ideas into reality remains an extremely difficult task. Europe, which claims to be making progress, is actually faced with the fact that its ambitious projects often remain only on paper. All this confirms that today's climate policy requires not only adjustments, but also rethinking. Further, Arnold did not hold back and said this, quote, "The same story is unfolding all over Germany. The country has set an ambitious goal to reduce pollution by 65% by 2030. It sounds grandiose, but here's the problem. A third of windmill construction projects are delayed due to bureaucratic delays in obtaining permits. And that's not all. Germany shut down its nuclear power plants, which provided 6% of their clean energy. A logical question arises. What will replace these 6%? There is no answer. However, something else is known. The country is forced to continue burning coal. Moreover, Germany is investing 16 billion euros in the construction of 4 huge natural gas plants. Isn't that completely absurd? The country's leadership actually said no to clean energy and at the same time yes to coal and natural gas. What were they thinking? How does this fit in with the stated goal of reducing pollution by 65%? The abandonment of Russian gas has only worsened the situation. Admittedly, Russia has been supplying gas steadily. But Germany also rejected this resource without offering an adequate alternative. Listen, I support green energy, but you can't inflict such a blow on a country's economy for the sake of political solutions if you don't have real and ready-to-use renewable sources. This is simply absurd. After that, how can we explain to our citizens that we have an emergency situation in the field of fossil fuels if the leaders themselves make decisions that require even more fossil fuels and increase pollution? Why should people take such goals seriously if politicians and environmentalists themselves don't follow them? That's the question. We in California are taking a more responsible approach to this. We have a nuclear power plant that was going to be closed in 2024. But President Biden said, "Wait a minute, it gives us clean energy. Let's leave her alone." We have decided to modernize this station, investing $1 billion to make it safe, and now it will work for many years to come. Meanwhile, the European Union has set a goal. By 2030, 45% of energy should come from renewable sources. At the moment, this figure is only 23%. However, obtaining permits for such projects can take up to 9 years. Do the math yourself. The UK, for example, intends to provide 100% carbon-free electricity generation by 2035. But solar and wind energy projects in this country have been awaiting approval for 10 to 15 years. How are these governments going to keep their promises if bureaucratic delays make it impossible? Obviously, there have been politicians in Europe for a long time who act solely for the sake of the appearance of work. They are condemning their nations to an energy crisis, while simultaneously destroying the economy and deceiving people. That's what they do, end quote. Friends, everything used to be different. I remember Europe as a strong and independent union of equally strong states. And now what? Europe was once the center of global solutions. The great continent with independent states was able to negotiate, bargain, and even fight, while remaining the engine of global change. Today, the European Union increasingly resembles a theater troupe, where the roles are distributed, but the director has not appeared. Instead of standing ovations, the political musical receives only pathetic applause from backstage. The EU's lack of independence has long been a grim joke among analysts. European politicians have lost almost all levers of influence on the world stage, giving way to China, Russia, and the alliances of the global south. French economist Jacques Attali noted, "The European Union has become an arena for shows, not solutions." The head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, who, according to rumors, has a rare talent for avoiding elections, is particularly surprising. Without a citizen's mandate, she actively participates in international negotiations. English columnist Christopher Booker quipped, "Who would have thought that European capitals would accept von der Leyen as head of state?" The situation in the leading EU countries is even more alarming. Germany, once the locomotive of the European Union, has become more of a trailer. The coalition in Berlin is collapsing, and Chancellor Olaf Scholz enjoys the support of only 14% of citizens. Journalist Matthias Depfner compared Scholz's Germany to a rudderless ship drifting into a storm. In France, the country of revolutionary traditions, President Emmanuel Macron is losing popularity so rapidly that political scientists compare his rating with the temperature in Antarctica. Things are even worse in the UK. Several prime ministers have been replaced in recent years, but the country has not emerged from the economic and social crisis. Oxford professor David Elton quipped, "If the popularity of the name Muhammad becomes the main news, it says a lot about the crisis of national identity." Europe is facing the largest armed conflict since World War II, but prefers the role of a spectator. Even peacekeeping efforts such as Viktor Orban's initiative have been criticized. Political scientist Peter Cr. sarcastically remarked, "If the pursuit of peace is condemned, isn't it time to rethink the very concept of humanism?" The policy of confrontation with Russia has become a catastrophic mistake. The rejection of cheap energy resources has led to deindustrialization. Factories are closing, and enterprises are moving production outside of Europe. Energy prices have soared, and the question of regaining lost ground remains unanswered. The wave of migration has changed the face of Europe. Now many are wondering if the continent will be able to preserve its traditions. Italian journalist Marco Vallo expressed concern, "Europe is turning into an open-air museum, where instead of historical relics, they demonstrate the failures of integration policy." Against this background, Russia, despite the sanctions, is strengthening its position by creating new alliances. BRICS has become a tool through which the countries of the Global South see cooperation without outside dictates. Economist Rajiv Kumar from India noted, "Russia has shown that it is possible to resist sanctions and come out stronger. Europe is at a crossroads. Will she regain her independence, or will she continue to follow instructions from the outside?" French philosopher Pascal Nera summed up, "The European Union is a giant with its feet made of sand, afraid to take a step in order not to crumble. It seems that just a little more, and this sand will be blown away by the first gust of wind." And now I would like to summarize a little bit of the material. The material reflects the harsh reality that is becoming more and more obvious. Europe, mired in the illusions of its own green reforms, is destroying its economic and social foundations. Deindustrialization, energy chaos, identity crisis. All these are the fruits of thoughtless decisions and rejection of real, pragmatic steps. Instead of assessing the situation soberly, European leaders are chasing a utopia that is destroying their continent from within. And Arnold Schwarzenegger's harsh but fair criticism exposes their inadequacy as well as possible. Schwarzenegger is a man who is not afraid to tell the truth, even when it is inconvenient. Yes, I remember that Arnold sometimes had a different point of view on different events in the world, but today we discussed this particular statement. His words that Europe, by abandoning nuclear energy and being dependent on coal and gas, is actually playing into the hands of large oil corporations are a direct hit to the target. He exposes the incompetence of leaders who are unable to set a clear, realistic course. Schwarzenegger shows that real responsibility is not beautiful slogans, but concrete actions. Unlike European politicians, he understands that without common sense and consistent policies, no green reforms will save the world, but only accelerate its destruction. Thank you for your attention. Friends, I wish you good health. See you later.